Boom, and welcome to another video of the Flowing Dutchman. Now, in this video we're going to talk about a topic that I wanted to talk about for a longer time, but it hasn't come to it yet. But I am here with someone who knows a lot about it. So when we were talking about this yesterday, and with we, I mean me and Wolkowinski over here, who has been studying Indian clubs or light clubs for a very, very long time. He was talking about some of the benefits on tendons and things, and I was like, yeah, let's just talk about the benefits and why you should actually swing this, because we can talk about different techniques, we can talk about different sequences, about methodology,
Sure.
about the history for ages, but why would someone even start to get interest in those things? Because at first they have to have some type of a motivation or some reason why they would start swinging these tools. And for a lot of people, the heavier tools are more attractive than the lighter ones.
Yes.
For example, the mules or the gadas or the heavy maces, they tend to have a more attractive factor because it looks like you're swinging a lot of weight around you.
Sure.
And what are you doing with those gloves? It kind of looks like, are you trying to bring down an airplane, or are you trying to do this? Like,
sure.
It has some form where it looks light.
Yes.
And it also looks like you're just doing it. But every time I post a video about flowing with the clubs, there's always some person that says, oh, this is actually very difficult, especially with that weight.
Yes.
Because if I swing with a pair of 1.8 kilogram light clubs, that's actually very difficult to perform the
it's a heavy club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul, let's get into it a little bit.
Yes.
I know you've made a few pointers, and I'd like to make this into like a conversation. And I'll just try to add things.
What I'd like to sort of say first of all is that the Indian clubs basically was promoted in the late 1800s, early 1900s as combating sedentary lifestyles because of the Industrial Revolution and stuff. People were doing repetitive work.
Yeah.
And it was very boring, that was one, and there was just a lack of movement where most of those people that came into the cities came from farms, so from manual labour. And some of the promotion of Indian clubs basically takes you away from that sedentary form of lifestyle into moving rather than becoming locked up as you get older. And I think that's really important to mention. So, especially as people get sort of my age, in my 70s, this is keeping me basically quite sort of fit and moving well.
Well, nothing has really changed.
Nothing has changed.
No, we're still in the city.
I think so let's start talking about the connective tissue.
Sure.
And I mean, there's four things and a fifth that we'll hit on.
Yeah.
Is ligaments basically. So that's the connective tissue in your arm. So it's the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder in particular. Then the tendons of all three, because you're using all your fingers, you're using your wrist to its full benefit, you're closing your arm for close arm circles and opening your arm for straight arm circles.
Supinating.
And supinating between the two as you're moving through.
Sure.
And that has a sort of a basic benefit that with the circles, we want to try and reach at least 45 degrees from the horizontal with the club. So you're holding the club in your hand and the weight's up there, which means that the blood drains down out of your arm, and then the blood is being forced down as you drop the club towards the floor. It's being forced, the blood is coming back into your arm, so the heart started to pump the blood around the body.
Sure. And
I mean, I consider that a connective tissue because I mean that's really part and parcel of your body as such. So we've got that's benefiting then the joints and the bones basically in your body because it's making them move in ways that we wouldn't normally do in a repetitive task. And I mean a classic repetitive task in modern day is sitting at a typewriter or a type keyboard, computer, and I mean staring at a screen. And the final thing is that is maybe not quite connective tissue, but it's the breathing that happens when you swing the clubs up above your head. You exhale when you bring the clubs down towards the floor, and then you inhale as you come back up again. So consequently, there's a very rhythmic element in club swimming, which helps. I mean, it stabilizes the breathing, makes you breathe fairly deeply, and expand the chest cavity, because the movement up expands the chest cavity, the movement down decreases the chest cavity. So you're forcing the air out and then inhaling as much as possible. And the more you're conscious of that, the better your swinging becomes.
Yeah. Yesterday you said something about the ligaments and tendons, but also the fact that it actually, when you drop the club, so when you drop,
yes,
it increases, but then the weight quadruples.
Yes. So I mean, if we just take a standard size Indian club, it's a 2 pound club, and with the 2 pound club, if I'm holding it in this position here, there's skeletal support here. So I mean, basically, it's not that heavy. It doesn't feel heavy. As the club moves down, the pivot point becomes my shoulder, and I can really, because the club is the center of mass is way past my wrist, I can really feel it pulling down. It wants to fall down to the floor.
Sure.
So a 2 pound club is 0.9 of a kilo for the decimal people. So from here, the 2 pound club, as it reaches the floor, it becomes 8 pounds, and then obviously the weight decreases with as you bring it back up to the top. So there's the circle: 8 pounds, 2 pounds. 8 pounds, 2 pounds. And you can feel the difference as the club drops down to the ground. It starts really pulling on all the ligaments that I was talking about earlier on, and stretching your joints out basically. So the connective tissue relaxes as the club comes back out again. And I just want to give an example here. If I let the club just swing, it's going to swing past my legs to about here. And then the job of the athlete swinging an Indian club is to swing it down and then pull it up to here.
Sure.
So you've got a combination of allowing the gravity to pull on your arm and then to pull it basically up, and that's where the work happens. And you're going to breathe in as you pull the club up to overhead again. Yeah. Let's go into primary benefits of Indian clubs. So with what we've said in mind, you've got increase in joint mobility, especially as far as the shoulder is concerned, and the shoulder girdle. The shoulder girdle becomes more efficient and stable. That means, for example, for the older ones amongst us, we can still reach overhead onto a shelf, for example. Yeah. And my mum, bless her, she couldn't do that. And when she moved out of home, she moved into a home on her own. Yeah. We had to move all the shelves down in her apartment because she couldn't do that.
Overhead mobility is
overhead mobility.
So even people of 30, they're starting to just grow into their main structure, and it's almost impossible for them to actually reach above. Yeah. So having a practice that it allows them to open up.
Exactly.
Super beneficial.
So there's a massive benefit as far as and you're not using a lot of weight as far as that's concerned. Now, as far as coordination is concerned, there's a quick demonstration of that. So a combination just on a basic circle, taking the clubs out to the side, crossing them at the feet. I'm leaning slightly back, bending my elbows, and pushing the clubs back out again. So now if it's done at a relative speed, not that fast, I mean there's coordination here, left over right, right over left. And I mean it's a very simple sort of exercise, but I mean it still teaches you to think about what you're actually doing with the clubs as you're swinging them. And it's, now swinging can be done very fast. I'm not a great fan of that. I prefer to moderate speed of club swinging.
I recently saw something about a study that they did for dancers.
Yes.
And it was specifically for researching about Alzheimer's, and they tested the difference in regular fitness.
Yes.
So just like standard movements where you move up and down in relatively simple ways. And they connected that to the idea of actually then dancing. So they measured the brain activity, right? So with dancing, you have to know where you're going. So you're stepping, you're following a choreograph, and what they basically said is your brain just gets very active, even though you're moving.
Yes.
So dancing would be a better way to actually combat things like Alzheimer's, where you're actually your mental health, so the coordination that you use between the mind and body,
Yep.
that is actually very healthy, and it's similar, and that's been studied quite a lot with instruments.
Yes.
So the same thing happens when you play an instrument, where you're actually
Or musical instruments,
yeah,
right?
musical
Right.
instrument, where you're actually learning your body to move, connecting it to tempo.
Yes.
And that's something that, especially when you swing clubs on tempo, which is
Yes.
something that you should do, it trains the brain in the same way. And at the same time, you have all these benefits that actually help with the arms and the shoulders and
Sure.
everything else. So the coordinative aspect of it becomes then very interesting, because what you're saying, left over right, front circle, that's relatively simple.
Yes.
If you take light clubs to a higher level, it becomes chess.
Yes.
And it can become so different, so complex.
It can be very complex.
Infinitely
Yes.
complex.
But I wanted to now to just hop back to one thing that you were saying. I mean, we were talking about the breathing, and it basically, with the movement of the circles, the posterior chain opens. I mean, with the breathing and everything, you're basically coming back to this type of position as opposed to being hunched,
Yeah.
which I think is worth mentioning in this, because you're actually, as if it were, correcting your posture by bringing your shoulders up rather than having them rounded and so on.
And then another one for the girdle also, and the rotator cuff, is when you do it properly. So if you learn how to swing, light clubs properly, what you're actually actively doing is pushing the elbow in and out, and you're actually training that. When people want to rehabilitate their shoulders, you usually see them do, stuff like that, and they turn around and do stuff like that.
Yep.
But you can actually actively do that you're doing that with the clubs.
With the clubs.
So you're training all those little tiny muscles in the shoulder, which are usually don't get a lot of attention.
Sure.
Which is massive.
It's massive, yeah, absolutely. So moving on to other benefits, elbow, we've already mentioned the elbow, so you've got movements that can be done like this, like an elbow circle, and also a movement that can be done from here, which is a very basic movement. The club can be swung forward and it can be swung in reverse, which basically means that if I do it very, very slowly, I'm changing my grip here to a saber grip, dropping the club down, and although I'm not doing that, you'll see a palm flash happening, so there it is there. There's a huge improvement in elbow and wrist flexibility with the type of exercises that Indian clubs has to offer. And you've got the weight change aspect happening here, because as I mentioned before, on a straight arm is 2 pounds and 8 pounds at the bottom. On an extended arm, when the club drops to this position here, it becomes 4 pounds. When it rises again, it becomes 2 pounds. So there's the change. So it pulls on your arm, and you have to hold your arm still to do that.
Yeah.
So, basically, huge enhancement to range of motion. In the top half of the body. That's particularly sort of, it's important to stress, I think. Now that we've got also, when you mentioned the circles and the coordination of right over left, left over right, it's you become efficient in your movement patterns.
Yeah.
So that's the next thing I just wanted to mention, and that in its own right enhances neural coordination.
Yep.
So and I like to call that mental gymnastics. You're working your mind and your body simultaneously.
Yeah. And it's tied to the concept of limb independence.
Yes.
So what you're doing with light clubs and heavy clubs, so whenever you're using two clubs, you're actually you're learning how to move one opposite of the other and then change as well.
Yes. Which is the coordination side of it.
Yeah, it's the coordinative side, but it's similar if you connect that to instruments. What you have to learn as a drummer, where you have to connect your feet wired to the... You're learning how to connect those differently from each other, which is a great skill. But it's with drumming, for example, it has a very specific purpose. So you're doing your right foot, for example, you're doing the bass, and the right hand does the tempo.
Yes.
So for most people that play drums, it's relatively limited to a certain pattern.
Yes.
But with clubs everything that you do right, you have to also be able to do
Do
left.
with your left, yes,
And
go on.
that's the interesting thing, because once you start to flow and kind of get out of your zone, you tend to always have a preference for one side.
Sure.
But once you start training, you notice that you have to do everything right
Learn
and everything left too,
to the side.
which is very good for the...
So I think what we just finished the Indian Club's benefit video on a personal experience that I've had when going back to about 5 years ago. I developed, that means I would have been about 69 at the time, I developed a shoulder spur on my shoulder here that basically completely cut through my tendon at the top of my shoulder. And obviously had to go in for surgery to get the spur removed. It was a 4mm spur, so it was like a sharp needle. That was literally, every time I moved my arm up, it was becoming quite painful. It had nothing to do, I was told it had nothing to do with Indian club swinging, but it was just, old age. I mean, it was literally old age. That's what the doctor said. So, so
you've got a disease.
So I think it's really worth mentioning that, because once the surgery was done, then I had sort of 3 months in a sling, and then very careful movements. They made me sort of do movements like this, as if I was praying, up and down, lying on a bed. And then slowly I started swinging very, very light clubs. And I'm talking about things like these drumsticks from Korea. But these, I actually use this in my rehab. So I was doing stuff like this to start with, and just getting the shoulder moving.
Yeah.
And then when I felt that I was a little bit stronger, I treated it as if I pretended that I had the surgery on both shoulders. Then I would have gone to this, which is a little bit heavier. Same thing, and then trying to lift the clubs a little bit higher, and then trying to turn the body. And progressively, I recovered. My surgeon told me that normally it takes 18 months to recover. I recovered in 6 because of Indian clubs.
Wow. I hear a lot of stories about people with, whether it's maces, whether it's clubs, whatever, and that it really opens up the shoulder, like it actually it recovers them, or it rehabilitates what they usually get different exercises for. And these tools are just spectacular. Because you use the shoulder joint is the most mobile joint in your body.
Yep.
Interestingly enough, when we use it in our day-to-day life, we almost use it as it is our least mobile part of our body, right? It's just static all the time. It doesn't move, even though the shoulder can move backwards, it can up and down, it can rotate outward, inward, like that.
Yes.
It's so mobile, so it's so interesting that we just don't really utilize that.
No, and that goes back to my comment right at the beginning of the video. This is so good to combat sedentary life. Which we all suffer from, and I think there's a very important thing to say here. There was a wonderful photograph that was done, a comparison of 2 photographs. In the 1950s, there was a photograph of people standing at a railway station holding newspapers like this, everybody reading newspapers. And modern day version is on the phone like this. So I mean, you're even more scrunched up. I mean, at least when you're holding a newspaper, and those were those big ones before the tabloids. There's the massive newspapers, and you're having to hold your arms out, which I thought was very funny, because I mean, even the phone, I mean, for all its benefits, it has negatives in the sense that we're scrunching our shoulders.
So you are basically saying that if the iPhone 16 is coming out, it's going to be like that.
We should be like this, yes.
I think there's so many benefits to this that we could talk, from every specialist in the body, they might have to say something about the benefits. But the most important thing, and we haven't really talked about this, is that it's actually fun.
Yes.
It's fun.
It's fun to
right?
do.
It's fun to do, and it's like you're playing a game with yourself, because there's so many possibilities. It's complex, it's challenging, and it's fatiguing at the same time. But the mental challenge and effort makes you go through that fatigue.
Yes.
Which allows you to actually have all the benefits that we talked about, but you're not actively pursuing it as a goal. It's the side effects of the fact that you want to do it.
Yeah.
It's just so alluring to have this. It's good to know that when you practice this, that you're incorporating all these benefits. But the main thing is that once the spark hits, and I see the spark in you, you keep going. You keep going, even though you've had cancer, even though
I've still got cancer, and it's not going to go away. Yeah.
Even though you go through these horrible treatments, you keep doing it. Yeah? You keep doing it.
Keep moving.
And you can still see the light in your eyes, and that is something that is, that is why we move.
Yeah.
Right? To stay active, to stay alive.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you for this video, but also for your continued adding to this community, because it's been massive.
No, it's an absolute pleasure.
Massive.
It's a pleasure. Okay.
This man. Over the years, I've found so much joy in creation. Light Club 6 is designed to bring that joy of creation to your screen. Through 3 sessions every week, you'll be exposed to increasingly challenging movement patterns with Indian clubs. In the first week, you'll learn about crossing swings. In the second week, you'll learn about parallel swings. And in the third week, you'll learn how to combine the parallel and the crossing swings. In the fourth week, you will master wrist circles. And in the fifth week, we'll dissect asynchronous swings. And lastly, in the sixth week, you'll learn how to combine the synchronous swings and the asynchronous swings. At the end of Light Club 6, the word beginner will not fit you anymore. Are you ready to structure and perfect the art of Indian club swinging? Join now at DutchFlowAcademy.com. Boom! Thank you for your attention. It's greatly appreciated. If you like the content, please consider to share, like, and subscribe to my channel. If you want to see similar videos, you can see them over here. If you're interested in learning more from me as a coach, I've got online courses on DutchFlowAcademy.com. Keep flowing. Ram Ram.